Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. This week, I'm excited to welcome Eric Wind to the podcast. Eric is a vintage and modern watch expert that you may recognize from his website, Wind Vintage, or videos giving lectures and talks at the Horological Society of New York, or contributions that he's made to Hodinkee's reference points articles. He's just a wealth of knowledge and insights and just an overall joy to talk to. Eric and I have worked together in the past at Hodinkee, so we talk a little bit about how we came up. We talk a bit about his past in the auction world and what that was like. We also talk a bit about what Rolex is going through, Patek, Universal Genève, what we can expect from them. He sits on the board advising what they're doing. So we also talk a little bit about sports in there for good measure. I really appreciate Eric coming on. He's always fun to talk to, and I highly recommend going to his site, Win Vintage, to check out some of the curated selection of watches that he has available there. There's always something really interesting there, something unexpected. If you're looking for something maybe outside of the ordinary, this is a great place to go and find it. We talk a little bit about that in this episode as well. A quick note, the audio on my end was a bit compromised in this recording, so I apologize in advance for the less than ideal sound of my audio track here. It gets a little peaky in some areas, so watch out for that. It's a really fun discussion though, so I hope you enjoy it, and thanks again to Eric Wynn for making the time to come on this episode. With that, please enjoy this discussion with Eric Wind. Eric Wind, it's good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Blake. Great talking with you.
So you and I are kind of longtime friends, colleagues. We've been through a lot of the trenches together, and of course, we're kind of in different parts of the world right now. The industry, yeah. I should say. For people who aren't familiar with you, Eric, maybe give yourself a brief intro and tell us what you're up to these days.
Well, you and I both hail from Wisconsin.
That's right.
Fun enough, Wisconsin has kind of punches above its weight in the watch world for some reason, including Jason Heaton. So we were some of the first writers for Hodinkee starting back in 2010. I beat you by about a month, and Jason Heaton as well. But 3 of the first 5 kind of contributor writers were from Wisconsin, funnily enough.
Probably coincidentally, by the way.
Of course, it was nuts. And you helped build the Hodinkee shop. I was a longtime writer for Hodinkee until about 2015. It was always a hobby, kind of part-time passion, hustle, if you will, from when I was a young professional in DC to going to Oxford for an MBA. But I was still writing for Hodinkee over the years. Then I got recruited to go to Christie's as vice president, senior specialist of watches. I loved that, did that for a couple of years, then decided to start my own business, Win Vintage, in 2017. So that's been the kind of arc of my career, and it's been a lot of fun. I do obviously a lot of vintage watches, but also pre-owned modern. Yeah. 2017? It's been that long already. Wow. It's crazy. It's coming
that
up
is
on
incredible.
7 years.
If you haven't been to Win Vintage, you have to go check it out. You have some really incredible watches on there. I always enjoy kind of just spending 10 minutes can turn into an hour sometimes when I'm browsing through the page and I see a weird watch that I wasn't familiar with, and then it sends me down a rabbit hole. You know what I love? You have these watches, the coolest Icopod watches.
Yeah. I love
Cause Icopod watches. You have the Jeff Koons Icopod watch.
Yeah, they're crazy watches, and they're kind of an interesting thing because it's obviously modern art and collectible art mixed with watches. They were very much ahead of their time. So very, very interesting. They're
kind of like the ultimate, and I hate this term, but if you know, you know, kind of watch.
Sure.
So I always enjoy seeing those on there. All right, well, we'll get into some more of the watch stuff and some of the industry stuff. But before we do, what are you wearing on your wrist today, Eric?
Today, a Rolex Submariner reference 5512. It's just a great watch. One of the subs, like I've said that if my house was on fire, like the watch you'd probably grab for me would be a Submariner.
A sub. And the 5512 is your reference. You like the 4 lines.
Yeah, and I was looking for a sub for several years. It was one of my first vintage watches. Then the example I bought was a bit over polished. I didn't know what that was. No one talked about that back in 2010, 2011. So then I just realized, hey, how come the lower right lug is thinner than the others? And it was really annoying me. And then I sold it when I went to Oxford to help fund a little bit of graduate school. Then I basically was on the hunt for a Submariner for several years to find a good one with an unpolished case. I didn't care whether it was a 5513 or 5512. I
Okay.
preferred 5513 just because there was less text, but then I saw this 5512 and the collection of Paul Altieri at Bob's Watches, and I talked him out of it. So
Okay, nice. Shout out to our friend Paul over
yeah,
there at Bob's Watches. We'll leave a link to them down down below.
yeah,
Um, well, I'm wearing a Sea Dweller 16600
yeah.
from
Oh, that's awesome.
2000 2001. I really like this reference. The
Yeah,
40 millimeter Sea Dweller of the kind of like neo modern
it's sick.
era
Yeah,
is awesome, and
yep.
it's just I don't know. It just like has that little something extra compared to like a 14060
Yeah,
from the same era, in my opinion. And it's still like pretty easy to wear, but it's got like just a slightly more interesting history associated with it.
yeah, and it's just a touch thicker, but from the front you wouldn't know it's not a Submariner because it's the
Yeah,
same portion. Nice.
and the no Cyclops. I know people get weird about the Cyclops, but a lot of people like having the
Yeah,
date on there, so it's kind of
yeah,
like the best of the
yeah,
best of both worlds. Of course, the Sea has always, to my knowledge, had a
yep,
date
yes,
on it,
yeah,
so and has never had a Cyclops until relatively recently.
it's crazy.
I think, and
So
boy,
cool.
they're doing some crazy things with the Sea Dweller.
And the deep
These
sea and
and the
yellow
deep sea.
gold.
That's right. So now it's two different things.
Yeah, exactly. It's nuts. And then you've got the what's the one, the deep sea challenge. So you've got Sea
Yeah,
Dweller, deep sea, and deep sea challenge. It's
the
ridiculous.
deep sea challenge that go very very deep.
Yeah,
Um, I tell you, the Submariner is probably good enough for my needs in terms of
yeah,
like depth rating, but of
I'm
course,
sure.
like that's only half the story. Like we like the stories that these watches tell, and the
Yeah,
Sea Dweller has a great story
for sure.
um, to tell. So I've got like a full kind of review thing that I'm working on for this watch, and
Oh,
the
that's
theme
awesome.
of it is kind of like it's a watch that has kind of like a dual personality in that like it has this great diving history and all that kind of stuff, but it's also like a really interesting, just kind of like kicking around everyday tool watch as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
So that'll be mine. I've really been enjoying wearing it, and much easier on the wrist than some of the more modern Sea Dwellers. I do like the 43 millimeters Sea Dweller as well, and that of course got the line of red text on it. Do you feel like um, that Rolex in recent years and maybe like the last 5 to 10 years has taken more steps to like more directly acknowledge their past?
They seem to. I mean, particularly with the GMT Master this year, it was a big, they've over the last several kind of watches and wonders brought out some historic watches and had them on display, which I don't think they really did in the past, like 5, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So they brought those out. They particularly with the GMT Master. You were there,
Yeah,
right?
I was there, and they had a whole like exhibit,
Yeah.
and the booklet that they gave me in the bag was like a full history of the GMT.
Yes. Yeah, I was
So
amazed. The quality of the watches overall was pretty horrible, I will say. Super polished. They had 6542 with service dials, like just crazy stuff. That I
yeah,
was like,
yeah,
dude, what? Famously, they have a red Submariner in their collection they posted before with the service insert where it's super thin numbers.
yeah, yeah,
All the vintage Rolex collectors were texting them, "Hey, we'll send you a period insert for free if you
yeah,
put it on
exactly.
the watch." Like this is just a horrible thing to look at.
Yeah,
So, they need a little help clearly on what gets put out or acquired for the collection, but it was awesome to see that acknowledgement of the history.
well then maybe this is just like step one of them like going down that route, right?
Yeah,
Like because they like historically, at least like in you and I's kind of periods of being enthusiasts in this space, they haven't really like well what you guys like you and I learn is from the kind of the old school parts of the community and people that have just figured it out over the course of like many years and generations and put serial numbers together, and like that's
yeah,
kind of where the general consensus is of the knowledge base on like
yep,
old vintage Rolex is not from Rolex themselves. So do you think that
correct.
this is maybe like their first step in saying, hey, this is something that we should be like maybe like they should have a museum, they should have somebody that's responsible for this kind of thing. Do you think they'll
Yeah.
ever get to that point?
I hope so. I mean, apparently they obviously they rumor is they bought several very important and very expensive watches the last couple of years at auction at Milgauss for $2.5 million, 6541, which I never would have thought it would hit that amount, and a John Player special for 2.8 million that they probably overpaid for. And
Uh,
a few other things like a Comex 1680 at Antiquorum, very nice pre-Daytona and rose gold at Antiquorum, like different things that they seem to be acquiring, but they
Interesting.
also should just be acquiring like really good condition vintage watches that are way less expensive. Um, the other, I think it reflects a couple things. One, they have more money than God, maybe more money than the Vatican or just
For
about
sure.
any government.
Yeah.
So they can do whatever they want. And two, I think for both Patek Philippe and Rolex, I've heard second or third hand that is, over the last decade, they've been both somewhat concerned before watches really took off the last 5 or 6 years. Um, that vintage would outshine their modern watches, so it was almost competitive.
Yeah.
And like I heard the quote in both cases was Rolex views their only competition as their vintage watches, and the same for Patek. Patek views their only competition as their vintage watches. Uh, I don't
Okay.
think either is in a position where they feel any competition in their respective categories, really.
Yeah.
So they're probably both in a position where they can do whatever they want and not feel threatened by promoting vintage in any way.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose does Patek have kind of another problem, and we saw the kind of phase out um in the transition from the 5711 into the white gold reference. So now that presumably is not
Yeah,
a reference that will be made in steel anymore, and the same with the
correct.
5164, 5712. Like, is that them kind of reclaiming the kind of like, look, we make these luxury watches. We are not in the business of making these kind of entry level steel sport watches, and we don't want to be known for that. Most
Yeah,
importantly, right?
yeah.
And for most, like, most people in a room full of watch enthusiasts, if there's one reference they can name from Patek, it's the 5711, and that
Yeah, for
probably
sure.
drives them crazy, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, it was, and Mr. Stern, Thierry Stern had said many times, like, we don't want to be known as a steel watch company. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that the Aquanaut will be discontinued in steel at some point. The basic
Interesting.
one,
Okay.
5167A.
Yeah.
That seems the next to go because it's been out for quite a while on the catalog.
Yeah.
They'll probably do whatever. It will be a 5267A and it'll be, or 5267G,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
white
get your
gold.
5167s now, is what you're saying.
Probably, yeah, probably if you're gonna logically think about next steps.
Yeah, yeah. So you came out of the auction world obviously in 2017. Um, I feel like that's a world that has undergone a lot of changes over the past like decade, in particular, with a lot more kind of vocal members of the enthusiast community, kind of calling them out on things. We've got the Perez scope, of course, and people like
Yep.
that. From your perspective, like, how much has that world changed just in the last like 5 years? And do you think it's for the better or for the worse?
Um, yeah, a few things that I think are interesting. One, the amount of bidders and attention to auction has grown a huge amount. So I think when I was at Christie's, like a Geneva auction would get 2,000 to 2,500 people registering to bid. That includes dealers, collectors, and sometimes museums like the Patek Philippe Museum or Vacheron Museum or others.
Hmm.
Uh, so that, that's a significant amount, but not crazy when you're talking about 300 lots or 400 lots. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
yeah, that was interesting. And it used to be much, much smaller than that. But and that was the biggest of the Christie's auctions. Like when I was in for the New York auction, we might have 1,500 or 1,800 people.
yeah.
Uh,
Huh.
then at institutions and companies. Then you go basically fast forward 3 or 4 years, and my understanding is there's always more than 10,000 people registering now in
Wow.
institutions
Okay.
for the Geneva auctions. So that's serious, and it's the same amount of watches. You've got 200 watches, and some of these auctions are 300 at
Yeah.
most, typically, unless it's antiquorum and they have a ton like 500 or 600. But the Yeah, so that's very interesting. A lot more attention. The amount of the revenue basically for the auction houses has gone up, in a huge way as well. When I was at Christie's, the whole department would do about 100 million across all the auctions, Dubai, Geneva, Hong Kong, and New York, plus online auctions.
Hmm.
Uh, and now the last few years are kind of hitting 200 million with about the same amount of staff. So it's really, and that's Sotheby's is up there, Phillips is up there. It's always pretty competitive for the
Yeah.
total. Uh,
Yeah.
no one really cares who's outside of that world who won the year, if you will, like
Sure.
for the best revenue. No one talks about that, but
Yeah.
in their world, they care a lot. Um, but yeah, the pay for the auction houses is not great. The starting out, you might start in the 40s and you're living in New York City, which isn't great with rent and food and
Definitely.
everything else.
Yeah.
So but a lot of the younger staff at like Christie's or Sotheby's or Phillips, their salary might be 40,000 or 45,000, and they come in with a different $40,000 Birkin bag every day. So it's because it's
Sure.
like a prestige. It's the same with the galleries. Like everyone wants to be a gallery assistant at Gagosian or everywhere else, and they get paid very poorly, but like their parents are sponsoring them to do it. So
Sure.
it's
Sure.
hard when the pay and the compensation is not great. Obviously, like people like myself looked at all the dealers. I looked at all the dealers who were having a lot of fun and I'm working my butt off and like kind of scraping by. And I was like, it seems like the dealers have a better life in this scenario than I do.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so I pursued that route and haven't looked back. But
Yeah. Yeah.
John Reardon did as well after me. He saw I
Yeah.
was doing well and decided to leave Christie's as well.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
yeah, it's funny. But yeah, there's a lot more attention. There's a
Mm.
lot more sophisticated fakes. Collectors are more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a perfect storm. But the auction houses are kind of making more money than ever.
Mm.
Not tons. It's not like everyone thinks it's a lot of money like that the auction houses are making, but by the time you pay staff, facilities, catalogs, when I was at Christie's, they were spending $30 million a year on catalogs, over
Wow.
30 all
Yeah.
departments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by the time you spend all that stuff, you're left with very little. Um, but
Yeah.
everyone's you always like the auction houses are laughing all the way to the bank. Well, it's not a good business to be in, is what I realized. Uh,
Sure. Sure.
it's really not.
Well, shout out to our friend John Reardon, who has collectability these
Yeah.
days and specializes in Patek Philippe, of course. I'll leave a link to
Yeah.
him down below as well. Another good guy and another good site to check
Yeah.
out. So there, you haven't really seen any kind of like negative impact from maybe some of the, yeah, I don't want to say shady, but like maybe um, lots that have caused some confusion or
Yeah.
been less
No, I mean,
than
there's
yeah
definitely some shady things and stuff. The positive is people are more aware that they need to be careful. They
yeah
can't just go to some random dealer in some vacation town in Europe and start dropping several $1 million on watches, which has happened a lot. And then they
yeah
realize it's worth like a tenth of what they paid for it because there's all kinds of condition issues they didn't know about
yeah
or replace parts. Like it's a common story. So at least people getting into it are more aware. I did my talks to the Horological Society of New York. That's how people be like, oh wow, there's actually a lot to consider. I can't just
yeah
go on, eBay or Chrono24 and drop six figures on a watch from someone I don't know. Uh,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
there's no cheating around it. I mean, guys like you, and I'm sure you've done way more than me, but I've spent days, many hours, kind of just crawling through different,
yeah,
not even just like books, but like forums and parts of the community, and like really kind of getting into the discourse of this,
yeah,
to get a good kind of a sense of what was going on here. And a lot of it is because of maybe poor record keeping on the brands themselves, or kind of keeping ahead of the sophisticated operations making bezels or dials or whatever. using some of the real parts and pieces, so it becomes that much more difficult. It's a scary thing out there if you're just like a regular enthusiast like me.
Yeah, yeah, for
Looking at
sure.
the space, it's
Yeah.
tough.
I mean,
Is
even
there?
like that, you like the Orfina Portia design watches a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean, most of those seem to be re-PVD'd, and no one can really tell the difference between like new old stock, and like replated. Like it's,
yeah,
you know, just
yeah,
even that, and those are under like $2,000 watches or whatever, most of those, and it's still like very much a minefield.
yeah. Yeah, it is, and I think there's a certain point where you just gonna have to come, say, what do I want to do with this watch? Do I want to buy it to be, a quote unquote investment grade, whatever, and think that it's gonna minimally hold its value, or am I
Yeah,
buying it because I like the watch and I want to wear it? If it's got a different bezel or whatever, or it's been re-PVD, whatever, I don't care because I'm
yeah,
gonna, wear it and nick it up and all that kind of stuff. So, I think it all comes down to like what you want to do with that watch
yeah.
at the end of the day, anyways. Um, so what is there anything that you missed from the auction world?
Anything that I miss? No, I mean, it's exhilarating. What's interesting, I mean, the auction days are always exciting, but there's always
Yeah.
a lot of disappointments too. There's people that are very excited. There's more people generally that are disappointed, so
Mm.
that's a bummer.
Like sellers or like buyers that weren't
Sellers,
able to get what they wanted.
both sellers
Okay.
in particular. So it's
Okay.
we always focus on the few outlier lots, but like the reality is 1 out of 100 consigners are happy and 99 are disappointed and think it should
Uh,
be more.
okay.
So that's the first thing. It is very much like a fashion show, if you will, like, or an athletic event. Like it's out there and everyone sees how it goes. Like it's very public for the people that are
Yeah.
paying attention. Like
Mm.
it is what it is. It's out there. It's like a basketball game or football game or soccer match,
Yeah.
whatever. Like you either win or you lose in a sense. Like it's you are working hard, it's stressful,
Yeah.
and at the moment, and then it's over, and then you're literally calling people to get watches for the next auction that night. It reminds me of Urban Meyer, I think, when he was coach of the Florida Gators in the
Yeah.
Tebow years.
Hmm.
Like they won the national title, and he immediately went into the locker room and started calling recruits like that moment after winning. And
Strike while
then
the iron's hot,
and
right?
yeah, and it's like, hey, we just won the national title. Just wanted to let you know I'm thinking of you. Like, you should come here. Talking to their parents, like, less than an hour after the final whistle blew.
Jeez.
And it's like, geez, it kind of felt like that because you would be like, okay, we've got a blank sheet of paper for the next auction. We've been working on these few consigners, and let's go get it. Like, try to
Yeah.
get them now and commit so we can start building the next auction catalog.
So it's a relationships business just as much as it is anything else, then.
And it's not just relationships, but like people cold email, so you gotta kind of stay on them and like get them over the finish line to consign and everything else. It's
Yeah.
it's very much like a recruiting, for
Yeah.
college. And
Yeah.
it's different. Like Coach Saban, I'm a sports fan, as you can tell, but like Nick Saban was like when he retired and shocked everyone, he just said, I can't. Every recruit coming in that I keep talking to, they and their parents want assurances that I'll be there for 4 years, no matter what. So like I can't recruit and then be saying I'm gonna be here the next 4 years, and
Yeah.
it just got too much. He was finally at a point where he felt like he could just retire. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, look, that's not a healthy thing. It's not a
yeah,
sustainable thing, right? So
yeah,
it seems like you're in a much healthier place now with Win Vintage
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and get to
sure.
take the time doing what you want to do, um, and focusing on the watches that you want to focus on. Um, I know you mentioned you kind of are solely focused on vintage stuff. Well, not solely, but mostly. Are there any brands like in the kind of modern landscape of working brands that you pay attention to or are excited about? Um, or that you kind of advise people to? I'm sure you got people coming to you all the time, like, oh, I've got 10 grand to spend. What should I go buy? Like,
Yeah.
is there any like where do you send people and who are you paying attention to?
I mean, for like vintage brands or modern, you
Like
said
modern brands.
modern. I mean, I love modern Tudor. You and I both do. I think it's
Yep.
the Black Bay 58, Black Bay 54 are
Yeah.
the best sub 5K watches in a sense.
Yeah.
I love Seiko 5 Sports. Obviously, we've done Rowing Blazers watches for under $500. It's the best under $500 watch. I would tell everyone they should buy one of those before they buy like a Moon Swatch or a Blancpain, whatever. Like those are
Yeah,
cool,
yeah,
but those are going to be ending up in a landfill, which is ironic because Blancpain is like all about ocean conservation, and then they're making System 51s that can't be serviced, and once they're done, they're done.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so at least like a Seiko, literally at that price point, it should be an heirloom. They're easy to service. Like you can pass it down to your kids. Like it should last 100 years, really,
yeah.
if it's taken care of.
And they're
So,
fun too. They're fun colorways. They're easy to
yeah,
change the straps on, all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
They're fun watches.
they're the best entry point, and I've told a lot of people to get them over the years, and like they're always happy and then ready to buy. They move from that. Maybe like one of my friends from Georgetown who's in the Air Force, he would like he got an SKX 007 right around the time those were transitioning out, and
Yeah.
he got Speedmaster from me after that for $5,000 and like an 80s one or
Hmm.
whatever, and then he's just very happy and like keeps working your way up the food chain, which is a very natural and cool thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I think the same as with the Tudor. They're great, great watches.
Are there like, I know you have the watches that you're selling on your site. Do you still have watches that you are keeping an eye out for your own personal collection?
Always, yeah,
Always.
there's a list of stuff I like to see. I mean, the kind of most random, but it's been one of my oldest watches in my collection. I love vintage Vulcan crickets. And there's such a wide variety of dials and cases. So I got one recently that's kind of a pull router case cricket. I'd been looking for one of these for like 5 years in good condition. It's
Okay,
got an
okay.
inner bezel, very much like the pull router, or as the Europeans say, pull router. Americans often say pull router. But got one of those. I'm
Okay.
always looking for random stuff. I like
Yeah.
Dunhill JLC Memovox watches. I like the bigger fish, I would say, is finding a great 3940 in white gold or platinum. That's an earlier series, like a second series.
Okay.
I
Okay.
would I would love one of those too, but
Huh.
it's hard to find one in good condition, and you don't want to just I don't want to overpay for anything just being a dealer. It's like finding the right watch at the right price and the right
Yeah.
condition. It all has to align.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got your process, right? That's why
Yeah,
people come
yeah,
to you and
yeah,
trust you with the
yeah,
watches.
yeah,
No, well, those are all watches that tell great stories, and that have great stories, of course. You know, what's been on my mind a lot lately are these older IWC Mark watches with the JLC movements in them.
yeah,
Those are so cool, and uh, and I've seen a few of them start to kind of sprinkle into my Instagram feed every now and then
yeah,
or something. And then it just kind of puts it back into my mind. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta find one of those before they're,
yeah,
I don't know, maybe they're already kind of taken off a little
yeah.
bit.
We
But
get asked for those a lot. That's like I have had a bunch of the IWCs. It's just at the end of the day, if I'm looking at one of the IWC Mark watches versus like a Rolex, would pick the Rolex 10 out
just
of 10
easier to
times.
sell.
But
Yeah.
even for me personally, like I think
Uh,
it's cool and like the bracelets are nice and stuff. But
yeah. Yeah.
for whatever reason, I would prefer the Rolex. Also the bracelets and wearability. But 10 out of 10 times I would pick that, but I still appreciate we get asked all the time, do you have any old IWC Mark 12s or whatever else?
Yeah, yeah. I love you have an IWC on your site right now. It's an old Ingenieur perpetual calendar
That's a sick
that is
watch.
just amazing, and it has me
It's such
wondering
a
like what the new Ingenieur will end up getting in terms of like complications.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, they should do something like that because it's a crazy cool watch. Like
yeah,
it's such a nice quality watch too. If it said, AP or Patek, it'd obviously be 4x the cost or whatever. But
yeah, yeah,
it's really, really cool.
yeah. So there's one brand that I wanted to ask you about in particular. It's a brand that I think we both have a fondness for, and that's Universal Genève.
Yeah,
And was of course the news last year or whenever it was
yeah, yeah.
with the acquisition of Kearns and Breitling kind of making that move. I wanted to just get your take on that and be asked, what do they need to do to get it right, and what would you like to see them do, like on a
Yeah.
personal level?
Yeah. Well, I'm on the advisory panel for them, so I was just in Geneva.
Okay, okay. So throw that out
They
there then. Okay.
yeah, they have their whole kind of product lineup set for creation, rollout, brand logo, color, working on beginning ads, boutiques, what those will look like, etc. So it's
Okay.
really was really a cool process and fun to be part of it. You know, something that I wouldn't have envisioned I would be part of a decade ago. Like,
That's so awesome, though. So they're pretty far along like farther along than people realize.
yeah, for sure. It's
Okay.
they're they're pushing forward in a big way and
Okay.
have exact plans for what they're going to release, the models, figuring out bracelet designs, that sort of thing. It's really cool.
Okay. So maybe we can expect to see something sooner rather than later on that front. Do you think?
Yeah, they have it'll take a bit of time, obviously, with movement development and everything else, but
Yeah.
it's coming for sure.
But from your perspective, they're taking the right steps, like the steps that need to be taken,
For
instead of
sure.
just kind of
Yeah,
like,
for sure. And
okay,
honestly, they had 24 of us on the advisory panel at the meeting. And it was a brilliant move on their part because these are all big collectors, dealers,
yeah,
some media people, etc. And like, I think all of us feeling like we're part of the process and on Team UG, if you
yeah,
will, like it's
yeah,
good for them when it comes out because they literally will have 24 people defending them, saying positive things about it all, versus like the top UG vintage collectors being like, oh, that's terrible or whatever else. Like none of
sure,
these people are going to say it's terrible when it comes out. For sure, everyone kind of feels like they have a voice and a stake in the process, even
yeah.
though it's not like we really financially benefit in any way, but everyone just feels like their voice is heard.
Well, you care enough that it's not about that, right? Like you want to see
Yeah,
it done right, right? Because this
yeah,
is a brand a lot of people have a huge affinity for, and if it's done correctly, and by that, like and this is something that or maybe you feel differently than me when I see newer brands bringing back kind of old designs kind of exactly as they were, that they kind of paint themselves into a corner a little bit, because where do you
yeah,
like how do you where do you take it from there? Like
exactly.
okay, you've done it great, and that's great, but like if you want this to grow into these collections, and kind of take the original vision and move it forward, then it deserves kind of a different, kind of more modern look. That's kind of what, back to the IWC engineer, I've always said I'm glad that they did it that way instead of like making a carbon copy
Yeah,
of the 76 one, because now they can kind of grow it into its own thing.
yeah,
And you don't have to get too detailed in this, but like, with UG, are they keeping that in mind where they still have
yeah.
somewhere to go with it in the long
Of
term?
course, yeah. I think they were looking really far down the pike, like really every year for 5+ years of what they want to come out with and what
Okay.
should come out with. And it's good. It's adding complications to things with time. Like it'll be good. Obviously, some of the case sizes will be bigger than what they were for the vintage collectors because a lot of those
Sure.
watches are like 35, 36 millimeters.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's hard even with movements to fit in those cases now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah, I think it got a really good kind of product development plan, I would say.
Okay, well, I'm happy to hear that. I'm really excited to see it. Okay, can we expect the kind of base price point to be north of where Breitling is right now, or kind of in the same
Yeah,
territory?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
okay,
it's good. They've got a real good plan for where these things will fall.
okay. So start saving our pennies now, then, you're saying, huh?
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
All right. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. But before I let you go, how's your son's golf swing coming along?
The yeah, he's doing well. He's just finished soccer season. He's a goalkeeper, so that was a lot of time because it was like 5 practices, weekend games on weekends and stuff.
Yeah.
But
Five
we
practices a week. Whew.
it was like 4 a week plus then the weekend. So we're happy. It was a great season. They won their last tournament, which is
Oh,
like
nice.
a
All right.
capstone. Was very
Congrats.
hard fought and intense.
All right.
And then we're doing some more golf and golf tournaments this summer, so it'll be fun.
All right. Did you go to the PGA?
I did not. I'm going to the U.S. Open though for a
No,
day.
the U.S. Open. Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, things are getting
But
interesting now, right? I feel like
yeah,
there's a handful of golfers that it's kind of like anybody could win on any
it's
given
crazy.
weekend.
Yeah. Do you
So,
play at all?
no, but I've been getting, my son has like been slightly curious about it, and I've had the last couple of tournaments on the
Yeah, that's
TV,
good.
like on the last couple of days. Like
That's
he's kind
great.
of like just ended up kind of watching it a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
you
of
got to
course the
take them.
last couple rounds of the PGA, there was 15 golfers within like four
It
shots of
was
each other or
crazy.
whatever. So I said,
Yeah, it was
this could be
sick.
kind of fun to watch,
Yeah, it
like
was
how
fun.
how this all shakes out on the last day. And of course, Xander Schauffele, I think that's how you pronounce
Yep.
it,
Yeah.
ended up taking home. That was his first major, I think, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was exciting. I mean, he's been a great competitor for years, so it was nice to see that.
Yeah.
He
Who do you guys cheer for?
A lot of different guys. I mean, on a personal basis, Keith Mitchell is a friend,
Okay.
and met him at Sid Mashburn in Atlanta when we did a watch pop up there. He's a
Okay.
Sid Mashburn ambassador.
All right.
So he missed the cut, unfortunately, but we're hoping he wins a major. Always cheering for him. Just it's always easier to cheer for your friends.
Of course. Yeah, of course. And lastly, do you think Tiger has another major in him?
I think it's probably past him at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
It'd be great for golf, obviously, if he did.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think his son is going to be like maybe not like the next Tiger, but do you
Yeah,
think he'll be like a
I
quality
mean,
like
he's got an incredible swing, just like his dad's. Obviously, he's got the best coach in the world, his dad, and whoever
yeah.
he wants. I think the key thing is just to be the top of any field. It's hard when your dad is the top. Whether we saw that with Michael Jordan's kids, I mean, we'll see LeBron James and his son.
Yeah.
But Jack Nicklaus, his kids kind of tried to play professional golf, but they never did much. It's because it's kind of given to you no matter what. Like, do I think Tom Brady's kids will be the greatest like NFL players? Like, probably not. His sons,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very hard for that next generation to have the same drive to succeed that
Yeah.
the dads had, and their circumstances are very different in terms of wealth and everything.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
I
That's
don't
true.
know that he'll be that great, but it'd be awesome to see him get on tour. Everyone would be cheering for him.
Yeah.
Funnily, Charlie Wind, my son, and Charlie Woods were in the same U.S. kids golf tournament 2 years ago
No
here.
kidding.
And Tiger was there watching his son and stuff. He
Yeah.
played before my son's tee time. It was like 2 hours before. So we didn't get to see him, but everyone was like excited on the course and stuff. He
Oh
was there.
man.
And
Well,
he
that's
won.
awesome.
Charlie Woods won his age division. So that was cool.
Oh, did he? Okay.
He's
Well,
got game for sure, as we
he's
see.
well, we'll have to keep an eye out for him and
Yeah.
Charlie, your son,
Yeah, yeah.
as well in all the tournaments coming up in the near
Exactly.
time future. Well, Eric, it's just been a huge treat to talk to you. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you
So
so
thanks
much.
for joining me.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, I will leave links to everything where you can go find more of Eric Wynn down below. Social Win Vintage. Definitely check out the watches that he keeps in stock. They're all super awesome, and don't sleep on those Icopod watches. they are very very cool. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next
Thank
time, take care.